It started like any other January morning in New York City. Gray light leaking through the blinds, the sound of a radiator clanging somewhere down the hall, and that faint hiss of steam that always feels like the city breathing through its pipes. I remember thinking it would snow later, but we'd seen snow all week, nothing special. The weather app said, light flurries, wind gusts up to 30. I laughed, poured my coffee, and told myself the same lie everyone tells before things go wrong. It won't be that bad. Outside, the streets were alive with the usual chaos. Horns, footsteps, the hum of a million lives rushing nowhere. I grabbed my coat, stepped out of the building on 45th, and felt that first sharp kiss of cold. Not terrible, just a bite, a warning. The kind you ignore because you've got places to be. The day moved fast. Emails, meetings, subway rides, caffeine. The office windows started frosting before noon, and people pressed their phones to the glass like tourists, filming the skyline fading into white. I remember one coworker saying, "They're calling it the Arctic Pulse, record low temps tonight." I laughed it off, texted a friend to grab dinner after work, and went back to pretending I was in control. But by 5 p.m., the city sounded different. The usual background hum had softened, like someone turned down the volume on New York itself. The snow came sideways now, carried by a wind that howled between towers and scraped at windows like fingernails on glass. By 6, the mayor was on every screen. State of emergency, stay indoors, transit shutting down. People flooded out of buildings, wrapped in scarves and panic. I stood in the lobby watching the wind erase entire streets. The revolving door spun open once, and a gust punched in, flinging snow across the marble floor. Someone screamed when the lights flickered. Just a blink, but enough to make everyone realize how fragile our warmth really was. I decided to head home before it got worse. The subway was half dead already, lights flickering, train crawling under the city like it was afraid. At each stop, fewer people. By the time we hit Grand Central, the car was nearly empty. I watched frost creep across the window from the inside, thin veins of ice threading through the glass. When the doors opened at my stop, the cold hit like a physical wall. My breath turned solid inside my own home. I layered on coats, blankets, whatever I could find. I told myself it would come back soon. It didn't. The city outside looked frozen in place, cars half buried, lights out for blocks. Somewhere distant, a transformer exploded with a blue flash that lit the snow like daylight for half a second, then darkness again. I sat by the window, candle flickering, watching flakes swirl against the glass. Time felt strange, minutes dragging, seconds stretching thin. I remember thinking how ridiculous it was that the world could change so completely in just a few hours. One morning you're complaining about the subway, by night you're wondering if the heat will ever come back. That's how it began. The 5 minutes that would change everything, still waiting somewhere ahead of me, hidden inside the storm. But that night, I didn't know yet how far the cold would go or what it would take from me before it gave anything back. I only knew that the city I loved was vanishing under a silence so deep it felt like the edge of the world. The morning hit like a punch of silence. I woke to a room that felt hollow, air sharp enough to sting my throat, light gray and thin like smoke. The candle had burned out sometime in the night, leaving a crust of wax on the table. My phone was dead, the radiator still lifeless. For a second I thought maybe the world outside had restarted while I slept, that I'd open the curtains and see trucks clearing snow, hear sirens, something. But when I pulled the blinds, the city was gone again, just white, endless, depthless. The blizzard hadn't stopped, it had multiplied. The building across the street was a pale outline behind curtains of ice. Snow had drifted halfway up the windows of the first floor. Down below, the street looked like an ocean frozen mid-wave. Cars buried, traffic lights blinking through frost like weak pulses. Somewhere in that blank roar, the city that never slept was asleep now, maybe dying. I boiled water on the gas stove, tiny victory, a bit of warmth, the hiss of life. It filled the kitchen with steam that clung to the windows and turned instantly to frost. I poured the last of the coffee grounds into the pot, watching them swirl. Each sip burned, but did nothing to thaw the cold that seemed to live under my skin. Around mid-morning, a sound cracked through the quiet, metal snapping. I went to the window and saw a power line sagging, coated in ice, sparks twitching like nervous lightning before it went dark completely. A transformer on the corner blew with a flash of blue, then nothing but snow swallowing the light again. The block was out. I layered up, sweatshirt, coat, scarf, gloves, and stepped into the hallway. My breath fogged instantly. The elevator was dead, doors half open. A couple of neighbors stood there with flashlights, faces pale in the beam. Nobody said much. The silence was a kind of agreement. Conserve words, conserve heat. One man muttered something about heading to his car, using the heater there. I watched him push through the door into the storm, coat flapping like a flag. The snow swallowed him in 3 steps. I never saw him come back. By noon, the cold was an animal pacing the apartment. Every creak in the walls sounded closer. I stuffed towels under the door, taped the windows, lit every candle I had. The temperature kept dropping. The thermostat, useless now, read 39 degrees F before the screen died. Outside, the wind screamed like steel. Snow hammered against the glass in bursts, rhythmic like fists. I started hearing things, the whisper of the heater trying to start, footsteps in the hall that never arrived, the distant wail of sirens that cut off too quickly to be real. The news station on the little battery radio was fading in and out, reports of rolling blackouts across the city, hospitals on backup power, emergency shelters filling beyond capacity, bridges closed, tunnels sealed. The voice of the anchor trembled as she said, "Stay indoors. Help will come when conditions allow." Then static. Afternoon turned into something that looked like dusk, though the clock said 3. I couldn't tell if the dimming light was the storm thickening or the day giving up. I wrapped myself in a blanket and moved constantly to stay warm, push-ups, pacing, anything. The floorboards were so cold they bit through my socks. At some point, I realized I hadn't eaten since the night before. The fridge was just a metal box now, everything inside already colder than the air. I opened a can of soup and ate it straight, the metal chilling my fingers. Every movement slowed. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It was in me, heavy and patient. Then came the sound that froze me more than the cold ever could. A deep groan from somewhere below, the kind of noise buildings make when they're tired. It rumbled through the pipes, through the floor, like the bones of the place shifting. A second later, another crack echoed from outside, lower, longer. I ran to the window. A tree had snapped under the weight of ice and crashed onto a parked car, setting off a muffled alarm that wailed until the battery died. The world was turning mechanical, each sound sharper than the last. I decided to check the stairwell, maybe find someone else awake, a sign of life. Flashlight in hand, I stepped into the hall. The air hit me harder than before. It smelled like frozen metal. Every breath was smoke. The stairwell door was iced at the edges. I forced it open, metal scraping metal, and shone the light down. The beam caught snow swirling inside. The wind had broken a window somewhere below, and the storm had invaded the building. Snowflakes spiraled in the beam like dust in a spotlight. I heard the wind funneling up the shaft, moaning through each floor. The temperature dropped another notch. I closed the door fast, heart hammering. Back inside, I could feel panic waiting at the edges of my mind like a shadow ready to step in. I told myself to keep it together, focus on small things, melt ice for water, ration food, keep moving. The radio hissed again, just fragments now. To record lows, below zero, state of emergency, stay inside. Then static. Afternoon turned into something that looked like dusk, though the clock said 3. I couldn't tell if the dimming light was the storm thickening or the day giving up. I wrapped myself in a blanket and moved constantly to stay warm. Push-ups, pacing, anything. The floorboards were so cold they bit through my socks. At some point, I realized I hadn't eaten since the night before. The fridge was just a metal box now, everything inside already colder than the air. I opened a can of soup and ate it straight, the metal chilling my fingers. Every movement slowed. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It was in me, heavy and patient. Then came the sound that froze me more than the cold ever could. A deep groan from somewhere below, the kind of noise buildings make when they're tired. It rumbled through the pipes, through the floor like the bones of the place shifting. A second later, another crack echoed from outside, lower, longer. I ran to the window. A tree had snapped under the weight of ice and crashed onto a parked car, setting off a muffled alarm that wailed until the battery died. The world was turning mechanical, each sound sharper than the last. I decided to check the stairwell, maybe find someone else awake, a sign of life. Flashlight in hand, I stepped into the hall. The air hit me harder than before. It smelled like frozen metal. Every breath was smoke. The stairwell door was iced at the edges. I forced it open, metal scraping metal, and shone the light down. The beam caught snow swirling inside. The wind had broken a window somewhere below, and the storm had invaded the building. Snowflakes spiraled in the beam like dust in a spotlight. I heard the wind funneling up the shaft, moaning through each floor. The temperature dropped another notch. I closed the door fast, heart hammering. Back inside, I could feel panic waiting at the edges of my mind like a shadow ready to step in. I told myself to keep it together, focus on small things, melt ice for water, ration food, keep moving. The radio hissed again, just fragments now. To record lows, below zero, state of emergency, stay inside. Then static. Afternoon turned into something that looked like dusk, though the clock said 3. I couldn't tell if the dimming light was the storm thickening or the day giving up. I wrapped myself in a blanket and moved constantly to stay warm. Push-ups, pacing, anything. The floorboards were so cold they bit through my socks. At some point, I realized I hadn't eaten since the night before. The fridge was just a metal box now, everything inside already colder than the air. I opened a can of soup and ate it straight, the metal chilling my fingers. Every movement slowed. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It was in me, heavy and patient. Then came the sound that froze me more than the cold ever could. A deep groan from somewhere below, the kind of noise buildings make when they're tired. It rumbled through the pipes, through the floor like the bones of the place shifting. A second later, another crack echoed from outside, lower, longer. I ran to the window. A tree had snapped under the weight of ice and crashed onto a parked car, setting off a muffled alarm that wailed until the battery died. The world was turning mechanical, each sound sharper than the last. I decided to check the stairwell, maybe find someone else awake, a sign of life. Flashlight in hand, I stepped into the hall. The air hit me harder than before. It smelled like frozen metal. Every breath was smoke. The stairwell door was iced at the edges. I forced it open, metal scraping metal, and shone the light down. The beam caught snow swirling inside. The wind had broken a window somewhere below, and the storm had invaded the building. Snowflakes spiraled in the beam like dust in a spotlight. I heard the wind funnel. "Ray," she said. "Yours?" "Eli." Another silence stretched between us, the kind that carries both relief and fear. Then her radio crackled, faint static, then a voice, broken but real. "Station. Survivors. Northern Line." We froze, staring at the radio. It repeated, "Northern Line. Safe." Ray smiled for the first time. "That's the subway hub uptown. If it's still powered, maybe it's a rescue point." Hope flared again, brief and bright, like the fire above. We followed the tunnel north, our steps sinking, the sound of the storm far behind now, replaced by the hum of the city's buried heart. Somewhere ahead there were other voices, maybe other survivors. The blizzard had stolen almost everything, but not this stubborn, flickering belief that we weren't done yet. The lights flickered overhead, a pulse through the pipes. Ray looked at me. "You feel that?" A low rumble grew from the distance, like something heavy grinding its way through stone. I aimed my flashlight forward, and the beam caught a wave of snow and debris rushing down the tunnel toward us, fast as floodwater. We ran. And for the first time since the storm began, I realized the city wasn't frozen anymore. It was moving. The roar came first, low and deep, the kind you feel in your ribs before your ears catch it. It wasn't water exactly. It was snow mixed with ice and shattered concrete, a river of frozen debris tearing down the tunnel like a white freight train. Ray shouted, "Run!" And we did, our footsteps echoing off metal walls, breath turning to steam in the narrow light. The flashlight beam jerked wildly ahead of me, slicing through clouds of mist as pipes burst along the ceiling, spraying jets of icy vapor that stung my skin. The tunnel curved sharply. Ray dove left through an access door, and I followed an instant before the avalanche thundered past, shaking the ground. We landed in darkness, coughing, lungs burning. I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Ray clicked her flashlight back on, barely a dim flicker now. The door behind us had jammed shut from the pressure of the collapse. We stood in what looked like an abandoned maintenance platform, rusted tracks stretching into darkness on both sides. Somewhere above, the storm still raged, but here it was quiet enough to hear the creak of settling ice. "Northern Line should connect from here," Ray said, checking her map. "If the message was real, it's maybe half a mile north." "Half a mile underground," I muttered. "Piece of cake." We started walking again, moving along the narrow walkway that paralleled the rails. Every few steps our boots splashed into shallow puddles that mirrored the weak light. Old posters peeled off the walls, concerts, political ads, subway updates that hadn't mattered in years. Everything smelled like rust and cold stone. After what felt like forever, we reached a junction where two tunnels split. The radio crackled again, faint and broken. Ray turned the dial, catching only fragments. "Safe. North platform. Generator." She smiled weakly. "That's it. We're close." But then a metallic clang echoed from behind us. We froze. It wasn't the echo of our footsteps, too heavy, too deliberate. Ray motioned to kill the flashlight, and darkness swallowed us. The sound came again, closer this time. Something, or someone, was following. We crouched low, listening, the scraping of boots against gravel, slow and steady. I could see nothing, just blackness pressing in on every side. Then faintly, a beam of light swept the walls far down the tunnel, moving like a searchlight. A voice called out, hoarse, male, desperate. "Hey, you two, wait!" Ray stood quickly, hand on her crowbar. "Could be a trap," she whispered. "Or it could be someone who knows the way," I said. The beam grew brighter as the man approached. He wore a reflective vest and a cracked hard hat, his face caked with frost and dirt. "Don't go north," he gasped when he reached us. "Tracks are caved in, whole section flooded." Ray frowned. "But the broadcast?" He shook his head. "Old loop. It's been on repeat since the grid went down. There's nobody left on the northern line." A silence fell that felt heavier than the snow above. I looked down the tunnel, where the darkness seemed to stretch forever. "Then where do we go?" I asked. He pointed back toward the maintenance shaft. "There's a service corridor leading to street level. It's dangerous, but it might get you above ground before the next surge hits." Ray hesitated, studying him. "Why aren't you coming?" He looked away. "I'm staying. There are others trapped deeper in. Someone's got to keep the lines open." Before we could argue, another distant boom rolled through the tunnels. The man flinched. "Go, now." We ran, following his directions through a side passage so narrow we had to turn sideways to fit. Pipes dripped overhead, water trickled down the walls. After 10 minutes, the air began to change, less metallic, more open, touched with faint traces of smoke and cold air. Daylight, thin and gray, shimmered ahead through a grating. We climbed the final ladder and pushed open the hatch. A gust of freezing wind slammed into us, nearly knocking me backward. When we emerged, the world looked like another planet. New York was unrecognizable. Streets were buried under mountains of ice, cars reduced to lumps beneath snowdrifts, lampposts bent like wilted flowers. Entire blocks had gone dark, except for the distant flicker of fires still burning where the city's veins had ruptured. Ray shielded her eyes. "North's gone," she murmured. "But look." Far to the east, past the frozen river, faint plumes of smoke rose from what looked like a cluster of generators. The hum of engines carried on the wind, proof of life. "Could be another station," I said. "Could be a trap," she replied, but her voice lacked conviction. I smiled through cracked lips. "Either way, it's better than standing still." We scavenged what we could from an overturned delivery truck. 2 water bottles, half frozen solid, a packet of trail mix, a flare bun with 1 round. Then we began the trek east. The snow came up to our knees. Every step burned. The city moaned around us, glass shifting, steel expanding under cold pressure. As the light faded again, the temperature dropped even further. My breath crystallized instantly in front of me. Somewhere behind us, a siren began to wail, a long, mournful cry echoing across the frozen avenues. It wasn't mechanical. It sounded almost human. We didn't look back. By the time we reached the river's edge, the ice had fused the water into a single gleaming sheet stretching all the way across to Brooklyn. In the distance, faint lights blinked through the snow, red and white, rhythmic. Maybe a generator station, maybe a signal. Ray raised the flare gun, fired into the sky. The red glow spread across the blizzard like blood in water. For a heartbeat, it lit up everything, the frozen bridges, the buried streets, the ghosts of a city trying to breathe again. Then darkness reclaimed it. The echo of the flare faded. Ray exhaled, frost trailing from her lips. If anyone saw that, they'll come, I finished. But deep down, I wasn't sure if that was hope or a warning. The wind off the river hit like a blade, sharp enough to steal breath. Ice stretched ahead of us, white, endless, ridged with cracks that looked shallow until you stepped near them and heard the hollow echo underneath. The city skyline behind us flickered weakly through the haze, half buried in snow. Every step forward felt like walking across glass. Ray led the way, her boots crunching in a rhythm that kept me from thinking too much about what waited below. We moved slow, testing each patch of ice with a pole scavenged from a street sign. The storm had eased for the first time in days, and that silence felt almost wrong. No wind, no sirens, just the faint pop and groan of shifting ice. The city was holding its breath. Halfway across, a sound cracked through the stillness, a distant boom, like thunder trapped underground. The ice trembled beneath us. Ray stopped, raising her hand. "That's not thunder," she said softly. Another boom followed closer this time. The ice surface rippled, a fracture spreading like lightning underfoot.
"Move!" she shouted. We ran, boots slipping on the slick surface, snow spraying behind us. A fissure split open just yards away, black water boiling up through the gap. The cold air turned to mist as the ice groaned, shuddered, then settled again. We froze, waiting. The cracks stopped spreading. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath the entire time. We pushed forward, slower now. The lights on the far bank glowed brighter, a small cluster of orange and white dots blinking through the snow. The generator camp, or whatever it was. The thought of warmth and noise kept us moving, even when the cold started creeping through our boots again. When we reached the far shore, the ice gave one final creak before holding. We climbed over the embankment into what had once been a riverside park, now a white desert dotted with the shapes of benches and lampposts buried up to their heads. The lights came from a small structure ahead, an old ferry terminal, half collapsed under ice, its roof bent inward, but still alive with flickering power. As we got closer, we heard voices, real voices, not radio static. A man shouted orders, someone else laughed. The sound felt unreal after so much silence. Ray glanced at me. Maybe we made it. We stepped into the terminal's entrance. A half-dozen people were inside, huddled around a roaring barrel fire. Cables ran from a humming generator to a bank of heaters and lamps. The air smelled of diesel and wet wool. Heads turned as we entered, eyes wide with the same disbelief I felt. A woman in a heavy coat approached, smiling cautiously. "You came from Manhattan?" Ray nodded. "What's left of it?" The woman's smile faltered, but she motioned us closer. "You're lucky. Ice took the last bridge this morning. Nothing's getting across now." We sank down near the fire, letting the warmth bite at our frozen skin. Someone handed us mugs of something hot, sweet, chemical, but glorious. For a few minutes nobody spoke. The storm outside began to whisper again against the windows. Finally, I asked, "Is there a way out of the city?" The woman shook her head. "Not yet. The coast road's buried, but there's a supply convoy coming once the sky's clear. They'll head south. If the generators hold, we can signal them." Ray leaned back, staring into the flames. "We just have to wait." I nodded, feeling the exhaustion settle deep into my bones. Wait. After everything, that sounded almost easy. Hours passed. People slept in shifts, the generator humming like a lullaby. I sat awake watching snow drift through the cracks in the roof. The fire cast shadows that danced across the walls, flickering like ghosts. For the first time since it began, the city didn't feel dead. It felt wounded, resting, waiting to heal. At dawn, the clouds finally broke. Light, real sunlight, spilled across the ice outside, turning it gold for a moment. Someone cheered softly. Ray looked over at me and smiled. A tired, genuine smile. "We made it," she said. I looked out at the frozen river, the silent skyline beyond it. The storm had taken almost everything, but not this tiny pocket of life clinging to warmth.
For the first time in days, I believed the thaw would come. The first sound of the thaw wasn't birds or sirens or even voices. It was dripping, slow, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the city returning after a long sleep. For days, maybe weeks, I'd forgotten what warmth sounded like. Now every droplet against the window was a tiny miracle. The ice that had caged the world was softening, turning from armor back into water. The air smelled different, wet concrete, rust, something like life. We'd stayed in the ferry terminal longer than we meant to. The fire barrels had burned down to ash. The generator coughed more than it purred, but it still pushed out enough heat to keep us breathing. When the light changed, that faint gray turning to silver and then pale gold, we knew the storm was finished. Outside, the river wasn't a sheet of glass anymore. It cracked and moved, groaning like an old beast waking up. Chunks of ice drifted past, glinting in the sun. The city skyline stood raw and scarred, half hidden behind columns of steam rising from manholes as the pipes below began to breathe again. From across the water, faint sounds carried, engines, shouting, the metallic ring of something being rebuilt. Ray stood beside me, her hood down for the first time since we'd met. Her hair was matted with frost, but her eyes were bright. "You smell that?" she said, half smiling. "It's the city." I nodded. "It's alive." We walked through the park, where snow had receded into shallow pools that reflected the ruined buildings above. Frozen trees stood heavy with icicles that shattered one by one in the morning sun. Every crash sounded like applause. Here and there we passed others emerging from basements, subway entrances, rooftops. Survivors wrapped in blankets, blinking at daylight like it was something new. No one spoke much. The silence between us all said enough. We made it. Down by the East River Drive, a convoy of rescue trucks idled. Orange vests, flashing lights, voices shouting directions. Steam rose from their engines, thick and alive. A man waved us over, handed us blankets, pointed to a tent where hot food steamed on metal trays. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I smelled it. We ate without talking. Warmth filled our fingers, our lungs, our bones. I watched the sunlight glint off the half-buried cars and broken signs, painting them in gold. It looked beautiful in a strange way, like the city was wearing its scars with pride. Later, as dusk rolled in, I found myself standing on the embankment again, looking back toward Manhattan. The skyline was a silhouette now, edges softened by melting haze. Windows glowed here and there where power had returned, tiny constellations in the frost. Somewhere out there are all the streets and corners I used to know. The deli on 9th Street, the subway hum under 14th, the smell of roasted nuts from a vendor who always worked the same spot. I wondered if he'd made it too. Ray came up beside me. "They're sending people south tomorrow. Convoy leaves at dawn. You going?" I watched a chunk of ice break free and drift toward the sea. "Yeah," I said quietly, "but maybe I'll come back when it's spring." She smiled, her breath forming a small cloud in the cooling air. "Then you'll see it alive again." The sun dipped low, so turning the remaining snow orange and pink, the city glowed like a bruise healing under light. The last wind of winter brushed past, gentle now, almost kind. For the first time in forever, I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I turned away from the river and followed Ray toward the camp, boots squelching in the slush, the sound of dripping water fading into something new, something like laughter, faint but growing. And behind us, New York breathed.